This is how dirty the coolant in the radiator is. Look at it. It's milky. Ew. It's gross. Hello and welcome to How to Hairline, where you learn something different every day. In this episode, we will be replacing the expansion tank of this 2002 Chrysler PT Cruiser. The last time this car overheated, it blew off the cover of the expansion tank, so I'm missing one. So instead of just buying the expansion tank cover, I'll just replace the whole unit. Another reason I'm replacing the expansion tank is because this tank became so opaque that I cannot determine the coolant level anymore. With the new one, you would be able to see how much coolant you have. But before I replace this, I need to modify this because this new tank has the expansion relief valve on the left side without any hose, compared to the old one where there's a hose on the right side where it will direct any extra fluid going out of the expansion tank. What I'm gonna do is cut a slit here so I can connect a hose and redirect the extra coolant coming out to the bottom and not just throw it all over the place. So let's do that first. As I mentioned earlier, we're gonna cut a small slit here so we can add an additional hose and hose clamp that will redirect any coolant coming out of the relief outlet, just for my peace of mind. Okay, I'm just gonna widen it a bit, but that is good enough for that length. Okay, now we're just gonna need a hose that's gonna fit here.
2 weeks later.
Okay, so I'm here at Home Depot. I brought the coolant reservoir with me, and as you can see, I found the perfect hose for it. It's a 3/4 outer diameter and a 5/8 inner diameter, and it fits perfectly on the outlet, the relief outlet for this coolant reservoir. All right, so if you need it, it's here at Home Depot.
The following day.
Now that we have all the parts ready and the modification done to the coolant expansion tank, we are almost ready to replace the coolant expansion tank. However, because the location is all the way by the firewall at the back, and the nuts and bolts are located at the back of the body of the coolant expansion tank, it is very hard to reach it. So we need to remove the upper intake manifold first before we can reach it. So let's do that first. Here are the steps to remove the upper intake manifold. First thing you need to do is remove the 5/8mm bolts in front. So use your 8mm socket to remove them. I'm using this claw that I bought online to make sure that the bolt doesn't fall under the intake manifold. It's very helpful. Now there are two bolts here at the rear of the intake manifold that we need to remove. So I'm going to position the camera from behind so you can see it. From behind, you have two bolts that you need to remove. One is an 8mm and one's a 13 millimeter. So remove both of them. Pull the hose on the side of the intake manifold. For safety precaution, let's remove the sensor connector for now. So pull the red security tab, then press on the connector, then pull it off. Set aside the connector wire. Next, we'll disconnect the air intake tube. So use a flathead screwdriver and loosen the hose clamp so we can remove it. Remove the other side as well. Remove the 13 millimeter bolt under the intake. Use a 13 millimeter socket to do it. Remove the hose on top of the intake. There's another connector here on the right of the intake. Now on the right side of the connector, there's a tab that you press down and you can pull it out. This is the tab that you need to press. Now put it out of the way. Now with all that out of the way, just pull up, wiggle it out, and you should be able to remove the whole intake. Now you can set it aside. Be sure to cover the lower intake manifold with plastic so dirt or debris doesn't go into them by accident. So I tried many angles to put the camera on so I can show you the nuts that's holding the tank in place. Unfortunately, there's no good angle for me to put the camera on. So I'm just gonna use the new expansion tank as a reference where the nuts are. So there are two nuts holding the expansion tank in place. One is a 10 millimeter on the left side and a 9 millimeter on the right side. So I'm gonna start removing the 10 millimeter first. Be ready to catch the nut when it gets out of the threads. And here is the 10 millimeter nut. Now the 9 millimeter nut on the right side is a bit tricky. I have this angled 9 millimeter wrench that helps me. So if you have any angled wrenches that you can use, try it because it is a little tricky to get into the nut and remove it. Okay, my mistake. The one on the right side is a 9 millimeter bolt. There you go. Now pull the coolant tank forward and upward. Remove the outlet hose on the left side. Using a needle nose, remove the hose clamp. Now pull out the hose from the coolant tank. Be ready to cover the coolant tank outlet because it is full of coolant. Remove the hose clamp from the outlet hose. Now before removing the old outlet hose, tape the new outlet hose on the end. So when you pull out the old outlet hose, it will slide the new outlet hose in its place. Now remove the old outlet hose from the radiator outlet and put the new one in. This is optional but not necessary, but you can use the old hose clamp to put on the outlet by the radiator. Here is a side-by-side comparison of the old coolant expansion tank and the new coolant expansion tank. And as I mentioned, the old one has the outlet on the right side with a hose that directs any extra coolant going down to the bottom of the car, while the new one is just exposed up here on the left side and just sprays any excess coolant on the body of the car. That's why we had to buy uh, an extra hose that we can install here so it directs the water or extra coolant going down at the bottom of the car. So now let's get the cover that we borrowed and put it back to the new coolant expansion tank. And let's install the new coolant expansion tank. All right, let's put in the new coolant expansion tank. Let's start by sliding the left hole on the hanger thread on the firewall and put in the 10mm nut so it is in the correct position in the firewall. Okay, with the left nut loosely in place, put the 9mm bolt on the right side so that you can align it properly with the hole on the firewall. I'm actually hand threading it in the beginning so that it doesn't cross thread. With the right bolt securely in place, now you can tighten the left nut. With the coolant expansion tank securely in place, you can now connect the lower outlet hose. Don't forget to put in the hose clamp. Measure on how far you want your new relief hose going to the bottom, and once you're satisfied, cut them with some box cutter or some scissors. Then install it on the relief hose on the coolant expansion tank. For added safety, you can actually add a hose clamp to help it secure in place. Let's start putting in some coolant in the expansion tank. You can now actually see the level of coolant inside the expansion tank compared to the old one that we had where it is really opaque and cannot see anything through it. That's a big difference in my opinion. Reinstall the upper intake manifold in the reverse order that we removed it. And that is how you replace the coolant expansion tank of this 2002 Chrysler PT Cruiser. This has been another episode of How to Helen. My name's Arjaf, and thank you for watching.